Hey everybody, it's Peter, and in this video I'm going to talk about electric vehicles from the perspective of if you are considering an electric vehicle for the first time. I'm going to help you understand what's out there. We'll start with the Tesla as an example, but I should also point out that I just did a video yesterday on the Hyundai Kona Electric, which is completely different than this. I also did a video on the Prius Prime, which is a plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, the day before that, and in the coming days I'm going to do videos on the 2023 Nissan Leaf. And we're going to talk about charging, fast charging, all those kind of things, all on this channel. And we can do that because I'm here at Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, where all of these cars are in stock. It's no longer like some dealers where you have to go in, order off a brochure or a computer screen, and see your car a year and a half from now. You can compare all of those cars right here on the lot in Fredericton, New Brunswick. And if you're just watching online and you're not near Fredericton, New Brunswick, I can bring these cars back on video to talk to you about different features and different things to make sure that you have a full understanding of what you're getting into if you're looking at an EV. So like I said, in this video, we're going to focus on the Tesla as sort of a Tesla for beginners or a Tesla 101. Some of the things that are different about this, some of the things that make it really great, and some of the things you need to be aware of, because some of the old myths about electric vehicles aren't true anymore, but there are still many you need to be aware of. So we're going to kind of show you the pros and cons of this and help you to sort of get an inside, in-depth look of what it's like to own an EV, to have an EV, and what you may want to look for to make sure that you get the right EV for you. So let's get going with the review. So before I go too far, there is some background noise in this video. I'm working in an active service bay over there. There's an active wash bay, so don't worry too much about the noise. We're going to hop inside the vehicle and you won't see much of that, but if you hear noise, that's what's going on. All right, so let's talk about this from an EV perspective. Let's talk about Tesla 101. And there's one thing I just want to point out because you're going to see it throughout the video. Inside this little rubber case is a little credit card, and that credit card is actually the key for a Tesla vehicle. Tesla vehicles, the Model 3 and Model Y actually have a little credit card as a key. Model X and above, and Model S, for instance, they have an actual key fob. At the end of the day, you don't really need either of these because if you own this car, you're actually going to use your cell phone, which I'm filming with, as your key. So I have this here, and there's some weird things I'm going to do with rubbing it along the side of the vehicle here when I do it up here. If I get it in the right spot, I usually have my phone doing this. The mirrors will shut and it will lock, and I have to put it in the right place to start the vehicle, but we'll talk about that later on. Right now it's in my pocket. So let's talk about a couple advantages that you get with Tesla that you don't get with every other vehicle. The first cool thing I want to talk about is the frunk on a Tesla, and that is the Tesla front trunk. Now, a lot of people assume that you don't have an engine, so every single EV has a frunk, and that's not the case. This is the Tesla Model Y. It's got a pretty deep front trunk here, and it's very useful for storage. And it makes this vehicle, from a storage perspective, equivalent to a vehicle that's much larger than this vehicle. So it's something to keep in mind that you do have this on Tesla. Other vehicles will have some small storage, but not many vehicles have, or not many electric vehicles have as much front trunk storage space as the Tesla does. There's also an advantage on the Tesla on the rear storage area. So let's look at the trunk for a second now as well. The Tesla Model Y is a hatchback design. The Model 3 is based on a very similar platform, but it's not a hatchback, it's just a sedan. So you have just the trunk that opens here. Now, whether you get a Model Y or you get a Model 3, some similarities exist here. First of all, the Model Y, there is a huge opening like a typical hatchback. You can have a 40-20-40 split fold-down seat, and the floor here is quite low compared to a lot of crossovers, so you have a huge space here when you fold everything down. Now, one thing that you may not expect is there is also a huge, and I mean huge, deep compartment right here. Because there is no fuel tank, because there's no, various things that you would have in a normal gasoline vehicle, you have a massive underfloor storage space right here in the Model Y that you don't have in every other EV. So if you have an EV that is based on a gasoline car, you tend to not have these types of storage spaces. Teslas, of course, are based on an entirely electric platform, and you do have some storage spaces here. Now, to be fair, there are many electric vehicles that start from the ground up as only an electric car, and they still don't have this space. So that's one of the things that Tesla does that's a huge advantage over some other brands. So if those two storage compartments don't make you think that Tesla's a little weird and a little different, they should. Tesla does a lot of things differently, but one thing they sort of set the standard for is how most modern electric vehicles are sort of set up on a platform. The reason you can have so much space front and rear is because the platform of this car, or in other words, what the whole car is based on, is a lot like a skateboard. You have the wheels in here with the motors in behind it. This one is all-wheel drive, so there's a motor in the front and a motor in the rear, so 2 motors driving this vehicle. And then underneath the car is, just like a skateboard, a battery pack on the very bottom of the car. Most modern EVs use that formula. Now, I drive a Kia Soul EV, and that car has the same formula, but they put their motor out front where the gasoline Kia Soul has that motor. We did the Hyundai Kona just the other day. It's the exact same way, and other vehicles will be similar. So they don't have that front trunk, even though they run the battery along the bottom. And it's just something to keep in mind. The battery along the bottom does a couple things for you. Teslas are known as very safe vehicles, and even though this Model Y is relatively tall, you can see I'm about 6 feet tall, it's a typical crossover height, these vehicles are very difficult to roll over because the weight of the vehicle is so down low. Now, having that weight, something to keep in mind, is that this is also a much heavier vehicle than your typical gasoline vehicle of equal size. So EVs are heavier, but the weight is down low. That can make for some pretty fun handling because it has that weight down low, but being heavier can change the way it's not a lightweight handling car. And it also adds to safety. Again, when you don't have as much engine components up here, even if you did have engine or motor components up here, electric motor components, you still have very good crumple zones and that kind of thing, which is very good for keeping you safe. The one thing just about every modern EV does have is a pretty good suite of safety features. And in the Tesla's case, you have to keep in mind that some of those safety features are kind of misnamed. There's things like autopilot, which is not actually an autopilot. There's things like full self-drive, which doesn't fully self-drive. So those are things to keep in mind. Although a Tesla can steer for itself, many modern vehicles with something like lane keeping assist and smart cruise control have the same thing as early Tesla autopilots. Full self-drive in a Tesla is absolutely more advanced than in your regular vehicles. And we're going to talk about those safety features moving forward. If you want a different vehicle, a Tesla's a good way to go. If you want something that is a little more normal, basically one of the major automotive manufacturers are going to give you more of the mainstream vehicle. Let's hop inside the vehicle, show you some controls in here, how to adjust some things, and then we're going to talk about range, charging, and some of the basics with an EV. One thing to note is jumping into most modern EVs, you tend to have these flush door handles, and that's because the enemy of range is aerodynamic resistance. In other words, wind resistance. So they always try to have a flush door handle on most modern EVs. That can be very kind of cool looking. It can be an issue in some snowy conditions, icy conditions. These ones aren't too bad. You push in here, you can pull that out there, and the door opens. Now, Teslas, again, are weird. They're very minimalist, which is a very cool design, but let's show you how some of these things work. So as we hop in this vehicle, it is off. Now, I can adjust my seat because there's regular seat controls on here. Let me just go wide angle for a second. But there are no other controls in front here. As you can see, just by opening the door and getting in the car, it's kind of turned on. The climate system has turned on, but it is not ready to drive. The steering wheel is kind of locked. Now, because I don't have this hooked up to my phone, it's telling me exactly how to start this. There is no start button in any Tesla. So I'm going to take this key card here, I'm going to drop it down to where they're telling me, I'm going to put my foot on the brake, and now the car is fully started. So I'm just going to leave that key card in there. Everything you do on a Tesla is controlled from this screen or these two little knobs right here. So as an example, we'll go to the controls here and we'll just sort of show you how things work. So there's pedals and steering, there's controls, there's all kinds of different things. So let's say I want to adjust the steering wheel, right? So the steering will go in there, and let's just zoom in for a second. Now it has activated this control on the left side here for the steering wheel. So if I want to tilt it up, I can bring it up. If I want to bring it in or out, that's coming towards me. And now pushing it that way is going away from me. So it is very different in a Tesla to do some of these controls, to bring it up or down anywhere you want. Like you can sort of see here, let's just go wide angle again here. Rolling up, the steering wheel is moving up. If you look at sort of compared to the other side, rolling down, it's coming a long ways down. So things are different in Teslas. If this isn't your kind of thing where you have to kind of dig through a menu system to do what in many other cars as a basic control system, then a Tesla is probably not for you. A couple things that I really like about the Tesla though, if you just kind of go over here and we'll just sort of go back to the home screen here. You have a fantastic navigation system in here. This screen is all nav. This over here, if we put it in drive, becomes your speedometer. Everything's kind of ready. And Teslas have a cool system here which allow you to sort of see vehicles around you. It'll give you sort of like these grayed out vehicles around you in many cases because it can see vehicles around you. Most other cars can see in some level, but Teslas also see them very well. Your speedometer, if I let off the brake here and touch forward here, it is up top there. So you can see the speedometer is up top. I just creeped forward for a second. Now, a couple things I want to talk about. First of all, charging networks on the Tesla. If you buy a Tesla, you're going to have your charge networks shown in here, your superchargers. If you buy an other manufacturer's brand, let me just look at the camera and tell you what goes on with that. Other manufacturers will have charge stations in their navigation system, but this is the big difference. Most of the other brands at this point, we're filming this in January 2023, their navigation system is not actively connected to the internet or anything else. So when the car was made, if the navigation software had a charge station in there, then it would be there. But as an example, we're here at Wheels and Deals. They just installed a fast charger, level 3 charger, and it is sitting out front. It is not in any of the navigation systems of any of the cars. So what you want to do if you drive a non-Tesla is get a few apps, and you can find the apps that work in your area. In this area, something like Flow or ChargePoint are two popular apps to throw on your phone. And if you drive a non-Tesla using Apple CarPlay, Android Auto, some of those apps work right there with that system and throw it up on your screen. With a Tesla, most of the software is built in and most of the software updates for you, which is fantastic. One thing you don't get with a Tesla is Android Auto or Apple CarPlay. So a little difference there with the screen. Tesla is really a software company, so they put all their stuff in there and you have that in the system. So something to remember for charge stations, most of the charging you'll be doing from home. We'll talk a little bit more charging in a second, but let's just look at a few more things in here. Taking a look at our screen here, this is a 15-inch screen in this vehicle here. It's 17 inches in some of the other Teslas, but very, very big screen, very close to you. And you're going to hit the home screen here. Let's talk about something like, for instance, Autopilot. Autopilot is Auto Steer Beta, and there are various things. Now, the one thing about the Tesla is, think of your cell phone, how it randomly gets software updates that you have to just perform over Wi-Fi network. This car is the exact same. You can add features to this car. Something like full self-driving, though, is a decision you're going to have to make when you get this car new. It costs a lot more to update. A lot of them have the hardware, but they cost a lot more to update after the fact than when you buy it new. Buying here from Wheels and Deals, you can see how they're set up, and we can sort of show you that. This one here has the full self-driving, which again is not full self-driving, but it is something to remember in the prices of some of these cars. Even though cars are identical, if it has full self-driving or doesn't have full self-driving, that can explain some of the price difference between these types of things. So let's talk about braking systems in these cars as well. So regardless of which EV you buy, there is going to be something called regenerative braking. Now, regenerative braking is a little different than regular braking. So these cars have 4 wheels with a brake in each wheel, exactly like your gasoline car. However, when you're on the gas pedal, which we now call the accelerator pedal because no gas, as you release that gas pedal, that accelerator pedal, you will at some point in just about every EV find that the vehicle is actively braking. Now in a Tesla, your brake lights come on. In every EV, your brake lights come on. In the Tesla, you can see in your screen when your brake lights are activated, which is kind of nice to see. What that regenerative braking does is it recaptures energy when you're sort of slowing down and throws it back into the battery. So it basically uses the wheels as generators and slows down the car. That does 2 things for you. 1, it slows down the car. 2, it preserves your brakes, which means that for most electric vehicles, brake jobs like replacement of pads and rotors and that kind of thing is a pretty rare thing. Now, many cars still require a good brake service to keep some rust, to keep things moving on the actual brakes, wheel brakes themselves. Friction brakes, sometimes they're called. But you can generally set how much resistance you want when you let off that pedal. Teslas are going to do it differently than Hyundais, which are going to do it differently than Nissans, which are going to do it differently than everybody else. So everybody has their own way, but every single EV that I've driven has regenerative braking when you release the pedal. Now, again, like other things that are misnamed, Tesla calls that one pedal driving, or one pedal driving, which means in theory you don't have to use a second pedal, right? Well, wrong. Tesla misnames that again. Most of the time you can get around with just one pedal driving on a Tesla and with some other EVs as well, but you still will sometimes need to use two pedals. So that's just something to keep in mind. What I'm getting at is when you get in these vehicles, the accelerator pedal will feel different. The other thing to keep in mind with a Tesla, it's a performance vehicle even in the most base model. The slowest Tesla, 0 to 60, is on par with most performance cars. So the fastest ones are absolutely insane. Why does that happen? Well, electric motors don't have to rev to make power. So if you think about a sports car, the fun of hearing them rev up, the reason we rev up a sports car is to get it in the power band. So when you say a car has X amount of horsepower, let's say it has 500 horsepower, it usually has to rev from 0 RPM or 1,000 RPM where it idles up to 6,000, 7,000 RPM, that kind of thing, to make full power. Well, this one has full power instantly, which means you're not waiting for the engine to rev up and switching gears and rev up and switching gears and rev up. You're only at your max power when you're at that higher rev in a gasoline car. These cars have max power from a stop right throughout, and that makes them exceptionally fast. Doesn't have to be a Tesla. Other EVs have as well. But Teslas are both luxury and performance cars. Now, the luxury features of some Teslas may not match your luxury features in your other car. For instance, this car here is probably around $100,000. I haven't checked the exact price of it, but it doesn't have ventilated seats. You can get those in other EVs, you can get those in other gas cars. So there are things that you're going to give up for that luxury, but you're still going to gain in performance. And that's something to remember. If you want a performance EV, generally Tesla's still the leader in that. There are a few that are out there as well. The Kia EV6 certainly has a performing vehicle, some of those cars, but something like the Nissan Leaf is not a performance car. Something like the Hyundai Kona Electric that I just did a review of recently, not a performance car as well. So those are a couple things to keep in mind. All right, so we're going to talk about a couple more things outside the car, but we're finished driving the car, right? So foot's off the brake. We've pressed in the park button here because that's your gear shift and your, let's just zoom in for a second here. That's your gear shift and thing. Mercedes uses a very similar gear shift stock on some of their vehicles, so not that uncommon, but we're finished driving. There's no off button, so what happens now? Well, I've taken my foot off the brake. The car is kind of where it is, and I use the door handle, which is this button right here. Right there, I'm going to press that, and I just get out. Once I get out of this car, it's off. It's turned off. And I can shut the door. I can show you what we're doing right here. Shut the door, and the car turns itself off. So you don't have to worry about turning a Tesla off, which again can be a little different than some of your regular EVs. So one of the final things I want to talk about with an EV is range and charging. And here in Canada, that is something that you really have to keep in mind. A lot of EVs like these Teslas can get range numbers that are in around that 500 kilometer mark. Now, one thing to remember is most EV makers, especially Tesla, the way I drive, they overrate the range. In other words, if this one was rated for 500 or so kilometers, I'm not likely to get that the way I drive. So don't sit there and say, well, my regular commute is 500 kilometers, this car goes 500 kilometers, therefore I'm going to be fine. That's probably not the case with most people. There are a few cars, Kia and Hyundai in particular, in one generation or a couple generations of their EVs that for 3 months or 3 seasons of the year in the warmer temperatures, they actually kind of underrate the range for some people, but it can really depend on the car. So assume that the rated range is driving very gently, and I like to say the rated range is a really good estimate if you're going to drive at that 50 mile an hour, 80 kilometer an hour mark. Then you could probably hit that. But for other types of driving, you're probably not going to hit that. So range numbers are going to be probably a little bit less. And then they're going to cut out less again in the winter, both because you're using your heater, which draws a lot of power, and because the electric battery is just not as efficient in the cold weather. So just keep that in mind. There are all sorts of forums out there. You can sort of see what people are getting on their EVs in the winter and in that type of condition, and you can use those as sort of guidelines. Remember, it'll always vary. A lot of EVs, I recommend winter tires. Winter tires are not as efficient as the EV tires that come with it. So again, they're good for traction, but they'll take some range away. All of this to say that the average person can do just fine in their everyday driving with an EV no matter what the range is. Most of us don't drive anywhere near this range, and most of us are going to leave our homes with a full charge. So while you will be charging on the road, one thing to keep in mind is in the cost of an electric vehicle, I recommend getting what they used to call, or still do call, a level 2 charger in your home. Basically, you're going to want to run something like a dryer plug to your garage or your home and have a 50 amp service or 50 amp wire and a 40 amp charger to your car, whether it's a Tesla or something else. Tesla has a charger that can kind of work on their own with sort of like a dryer plug. Most other vehicles, you're going to buy a level 2 system and plug it in, which also works on a Tesla. That is sort of your standard quick charging. Tesla has supercharging, there is level 3 charging or DC charging, which can charge most EVs up to 80% in about an hour to an hour and a half out on the road if that charger is working full. Now that's another thing to keep in mind if you're doing a trip. Tesla superchargers, most of them are pretty reliable, but there is some variance in how quickly they can charge, and the same thing happens with other brands. When you have another brand of an EV, the charging network is not tied to the vehicle manufacturer, and they can be wildly varying. We just stuck a charger in here, we run a wire ourselves, and if we didn't choose to run the right wire, just because your car is capable or the charging system outside is capable of a certain charge speed, it doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get that. And a lot of them have apps where you can connect your car to and see how fast it's charging. Tesla has that, many other vehicles have that, and many charge stations have that to keep in mind. So charging networks, your car can absolutely fast charge. Most modern EVs can fast charge. Usually about an hour will get you most of that charge back. But keep in mind that it can vary, and when it varies, it's usually due to the charger, not to the vehicle itself. So let's talk a couple things more before we wrap this video up. If you're looking at an EV, a Tesla is still the gold standard. And Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals, last time I checked, I think we had 8 or 10 of these in the lot. We've had 12 or 15 at times. We always have Teslas in stock, but these can be a little bit more expensive. Remember, they are performance vehicles. They're kind of in that luxury class. If this appeals to you, you're going to be spending that $50-ish thousand Canadian and up for a relatively new Model 3 or above. This is a Model Y, so it's going to be priced a little bit above that again. This one, again, probably around $100,000 as equipped, but it is a very, very quick car. So there's that to remember. You don't have to get a Tesla to get a very good EV nowadays. I drive a Kia Soul EV. It's been perfect for us. We've been driving that since 2019. It's a 2020 model, and a lot of those cars are perfectly capable. There are shorter range and longer range vehicles, and those vehicles from other manufacturers are going to tend to be more normal. They have a start button just like your push button start on your car. They have typical controls for your mirrors and your steering wheel and all those kinds of things instead of having a single screen. The one advantage that Tesla has is those over-the-air updates. This car will continue to improve over time. Very few other manufacturers offer over-the-air updates on their EVs. Some of them are starting to do that, but they don't have quite the control that Tesla does. So you want to keep that in mind as well. You'll still have to use a dealer network. Now, sometimes dealer networks can be helpful for you, and sometimes they can be a burden to you, and that's for you to decide. If you want to compare an EV, here's the benefit of Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals. We have them. We have them in stock. It's very difficult to go compare EVs side by side. But like I said, right now, Tesla in stock, Hyundai Kona electric in stock, Prius Prime in stock, a couple of those actually, a couple Leaf, Nissan Leafs, 2023 Nissan Leafs are going to be in stock. Various other vehicles are coming in stock, whether it's a PHEV or an EV, so plug-in hybrid electric vehicle, still has a gas engine, but you can have EV range or electric. There are all kinds of them right here. And that's one thing to remember, is that it's very difficult to go to a dealer, test drive an EV, and take it right home. Here at Jim Gilbert's, you can do that. So if you have more questions about Tesla EVs or other EVs, let me know in the comments the types of things you want to know about these vehicles, and I'll continue to make videos about them so that you can have a better understanding of what you're looking at. We will talk about a charging system, including fast charging. We have a fast charger that was just installed here at Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals. We'll do a video on that very soon. And like I said, other vehicles we'll be reviewing regularly. So make sure you subscribe to this channel. And like I said, Jim Gilbert's Wheels and Deals is an amazing place to check out all these EVs side by side, and you can get the same salesperson to run numbers on all of them for you, so you have an apples to apples comparison about which one you want, and they will tell you all the things that you need to know about these EVs. So thanks everybody for watching. Let this just be the first video in a series. If there's things you want to know, let me know, and we'll go from there.